When you think about product sense interviews, there's kind of like a big question that you get asked, and the whole interview flows from there. Analytical thinking interviews might have like a main question with some clarifying questions, followed by a trade off question at some point in the interview. As you think about leadership and drive interviews, you could have an interviewer start an interview with one question and not really knowing what the other questions are going to be. And Robert, I think this was kind of more of the bucket that you fell into as an interviewer is I'm going to ask you one big question and kind of follow my curiosity to get as much signal as I need across these various dimensions that we're going to get into from one trailhead per se in that conversation. And then Brian, I think you might fall into the second bucket of interviewers that maybe you actually did have kind of like more explicit questions that you liked to ask or you like to ask that allow you to get the signal on each of these dimensions. Would you guys both agree that that's a fair characterization of your strategies as interviewers?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. And I think that's helpful for candidates because sometimes they just don't know like if all the interviewers show up the same exact way or if there's some variability. So I want them to be prepared for both. Okay, so now let's get into the second dimension that is all around like seeking growth and learning opportunities. So I forget which one of you went first on the last dimension, but let's rotate it. Yeah, what stands out to you about this dimension, Brian? Brian, you went first, or Robert went first?
I went first on
You
the
went
last
first.
one,
Brian
so
went
I was
first.
Okay, so Robert,
pointing to
you can go
Robert.
first. Yeah, yeah.
Sure. The opportunities to grow and learn. Again, this isn't leadership and drive, right? So we're looking for learning, probably not technical learning. Oh, I learned about building evals. Yeah, great. You should, as a PM, be learning new technical things all the time. But this is learning about yourself, learning about your weaknesses, your areas for growth, figuring out how you PM, where the gaps are, and really demonstrating that you want to fill those gaps. So, you pretty much always get a question, the intent of which is, what are you working on right now? And it is not, oh, I'm building, a new bot to do this, or it's like, what are you working on you? Which aspect of PMing are you trying to improve? And I kind of call everything else technical. There's like behavioral learning and there's technical learning. Behavioral stuff is about yourself. And we're always looking for people who are very reflective, that they reflect on both failure and success. Something we talked about on the Super podcast, I think, Ben, was that sometimes when people get a question like, what's the project you're most proud of? They kind of forget to reflect because it's like, oh, we did this and it was great. And Meta does ask a lot of kind of probing, kind of not negative questions, but when did you struggle to support your team effectively, or when weren't you able to get leadership support? Because a lot of learning comes from those tough situations where things are difficult, when things aren't going well for us. So do be aware if you get asked, what's been your biggest success as a PM? Make sure you still bring in some reflection that it's like, yeah, we shipped and it was amazing and we got lots of users or we drove lots of revenue, but I can't help feeling I could have helped the team to focus better. Or if I'd learned more about users before we started, we could have shipped sooner by having more focus, or whatever it happens to be. And the STAR framework, which most people know, situation, task, action, and results. I like to add an L and a U, which means it's not quite so nice an acronym, but the L is for learning. That's what did you learn through that process? Again, not really a technical learning. I learned that people's past experience will impact their judgment. If they are new to something, they might be afraid, or they might be worried, about their ability to handle it for the first time. Other people may be jaded because they've done something so many times. So that might be a learning from a situation. It's a learning about people and learning about how people behave and how people engage. And then the upgrade, particularly for senior leaders, is the most important piece. So it's like, what did I learn? The upgrade is, how have I changed the way I behave to bake in that learning? Because I don't know about other folks on the call, I learn something pretty much every day. My ability to wrap that into my behavior is definitely imperfect, right? There's things I learn and then a week later I'm like, hang on, I already learned that. Why did I make the same mistake? So the upgrade is to say, so now when I join a new team, I like to look at all of the individuals, figure out where they've come from, what their biases might be, what their strengths and weaknesses are, so that I don't get caught out later on. So that's that idea of like, and the reason I use the word upgrade, think of it like upgrading an operating system. It's like we've patched that bug. I won't make that mistake again. And the learning that I had from that situation, it now carries with me and it changes the way I behave. And if you don't have to bring those things in unprompted. lots of interviewers will say, "What did you learn through that process?" But if you can bring them in unprompted and talk about that, and don't feel you have to save learning for the end. That's also a common thing. Sometimes if you're talking about the 6 month or a year project, you probably learn things along the way. You don't have to wait until kind of the project's launched and then say, "Oh, I learned about stakeholder management early on." Talk about it when it feels natural, and also before we hear from Brian, I would say that about being natural. Don't copy the way other people do L&D answers. Like, don't be a robot. Like, be you. Talk about things the way you talk about them, and that's where, just being natural across the piece, not and again in the reflection, some of the best L&D interviews, I've had people, really kind of feeling like, oh yeah, that was really tough, and their sense of frustration comes across. That's a great thing. If you see someone who's really frustrated, I'm struggling to get the best out of my team, and I tried this and I tried that. Like, I would I would much rather see that than see someone who's really polished, and much rather see that sense of kind of struggle. But yeah, the learning and the upgrade stuff, you can bring that in organically. Most interviewers will prod you towards it, but either way is fine. You don't have to bring it, but if you can, then do.
If I could title this so everybody like sort of really understands like succinctly and concretely what growing continuously means, I would title this growth and feedback in a 2 by 2 grid where there is growth for self and growth for others, and feedback for self and feedback for others. So a lot of this is they are looking for signal on not just like, hey, I'm Brian, I'm committed to my craft of being a PM, to Robert's point of getting better at being a PM, but as like, hey, when did Brian get hard feedback? How did Brian take that hard feedback, assimilate it, and like really use that difficult feedback, that failure, that launch that went awry, and assimilate that into his persona as a PM, so that would never happen again, right? So that's the first piece. That's the self piece. The second piece, the other piece, I think there's two dimensions, but this is the most concrete part of it, is like, okay, now that I have learned that lesson, how have I proactively helped, taught, coached, advised, and or given hard feedback to other people on the team, not just product to eng, design, anybody, XFN. How do I approach that process and methodology of that feedback to support other people's growth and the team's health, company's health, the success of the user? So I think that is really the signal that they're going for here.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing across both of these is that there's kind of like minimum bar that some people might have for what they think sounds like a good story that ends with, like the action kind of reaching a certain conclusion. But Meta in particular is just so um, maniacally focused on finding people who can really go that next level of like how they internalize like what they learned. And Brian, to your point, like if you learn something so deeply that you found yourself then giving someone else feedback about it, and you talked about how it helped them upgrade their behavior, like that's, I think, kind of like a home run story as far as like really internalizing some of these learnings. So I love that. And I want people to shoot for the moon with their stories. Like, don't hold back. And Robert, you have something you like to kind of share, or something that stuck with me, which is like, the story. Um, the story almost always has another chapter. If it ends with like a failure, there's like another chapter to that story, which is about the success that follows the failure, and just making sure you remember to kind of land that plane with the end of the story.